I'm Will Reuter, and this is HBA After Hours, a podcast from the Home Builders Association of Greater Kansas City. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the HBA After Hours podcast produced by your local Home Builders Association of Greater Kansas City. As always, I'm your host, Will Reuter, and with me today is...
Keith Sauro, the publisher of Design KC and the Real Estate Book and New Home Guide. And what else can we throw in there today?
We can throw in that we're sponsored by Star Companies and Sun Lumber today.
That's a great point.
A pretty important one to drop in there.
Very important.
But another important thing to drop in is our guest for today. Someone who's not a member of the HBA, so we're kind of switching it up a little bit.
Yep.
But we are going to bring in outside voices, outside perspectives, and a name that many of our listeners will probably know, and a name that we would want our listeners to know. For those that don't know him. So with us today is Patrick Tuohey. Patrick, thanks for being here today.
It's my pleasure. I guess if you've got a lumber sponsor, all my lumber jokes have to go, right? Half my material is going to be building supplies.
Unless they're really good.
That's right.
We'll forgive it.
We'll accept those.
So I'm grateful to be here. I've been researching and writing about housing for probably longer than I want to admit, maybe 10 years or so. And the problem that I identified is, and it's not me that identified it, we all know this, there simply isn't enough housing.
Right.
And what fascinates me, and we'll talk more about this, is that nobody is opposed to housing necessarily. They will all say they're for it, and yet it doesn't get built.
Right.
And it's the kind of issue that whether you're left, right, or center, you understand that we need more of it. And it's kind of a cornerstone of so many other social issues. So I've been writing about housing for the Show Me Institute, which is a think tank that focuses on Missouri politics, Missouri state politics. And more recently, I'm the policy director for the Better Cities Project, which is similar in its it being a think tank, but we don't just focus on Missouri. I love talking about Kansas City and St. Louis, and we look at all cities in the country because even though they will have different cultures, different opportunities, they often all have the same problems. Housing is certainly a problem we see around the country. And sometimes I have found it's great when you go and talk to a particular city council or particular leaders in a part of the country to remind them they're not the only ones facing this problem. This isn't unique to their city. The rest of the country is seeing this as well. And I think sometimes the value of just being told that is that they kind of relax and say, okay, so it's not something that we uniquely have to panic and solve. This is something that the entire country, for example, suburbanization, right? Cities are losing their population. People are moving out to the suburbs, housing being one of the causes, one of the opportunities for it. But when you tell Kansas City, when you tell St. Louis, it's not just you. I think that takes the pressure off them from having to adopt some really bad idea.
Misery loves company? Is that what you're saying?
That's part of it.
No.
But if you think you're the only one who's dealing with a problem, you are going to act to solve it. But if you realize that everybody has the problem, maybe you're like, okay, it isn't just me. Let me see what other people are doing, and I don't need to overreact. And again, housing is one of those issues where cities are learning from each other, good and bad. And there are a lot of positives coming out.
So do you think they're underreacting as a result of it?
I think they are coming around.
Okay.
I think, so, we can jump right into it. I think one of the problems, and this is true of all sorts of public policy, but one of the problems with housing is that the situation we're in now didn't just happen overnight. It happened over decades, over small, well-intended policies that everybody thought was going to make us, richer and happier and our teeth whiter. And then like kind of sludge in a drain pipe, they built up over the years. And now we're at a point where even if you want to build housing, you can't. And you have to go back and investigate all the different things that are standing in the way. And there are all sorts of different things standing in the way. So I think cities are beginning to wake up to that. Again, cities in all over the country, but people on the left and on the right are realizing that they've got to get out of the way.
Yeah, and I get the sense, Patrick, that it's not necessarily cities that are coming to their own conclusion that they've got a housing problem. It's that within the broader public, the consciousness around housing and the historic deterioration in housing affordability has necessitated that they take a look at this. I mean, Market Watch had a poll at the right at the outset of the 2024 elections that said that housing affordability is now the top motivating factor for Gen Z to cast a ballot. And
I don't doubt it.
And the fact that that has superseded some of the other things that just, permeate our national discourse, whether it's climate change or social justice or any of those things, it's now housing. This is the issue. So regardless of whether or not a local politician has, done a self-determination that housing is the issue, or they're feeling the pressure, we have to seize this moment in time to actually articulate, okay, so the first step to recovery is admitting there's a problem. Okay,
that's right.
We've got a problem. What are we going to do about it? What are the 12 steps we can take to give ourselves some long-term success?
And you're saying those same people are looking at what the other states are doing before they're even remotely reacting.
Well, as Will said, the first step is to identify the problem. I'm trying to figure out in housing what the higher power would be. But enough of that. So the first thing is to understand you've got a problem, and you're exactly right. I don't know. People may define the American dream differently, but certainly home ownership is a significant portion of it. Being independent, actually owning a piece of land, having something that gives you a return on your investment in a place where you can call your own and raise your family. Kind of the castle. Every man has a castle. Yes, absolutely. It's not just the problems we're seeing in San Francisco and Los Angeles with homelessness because people are being priced out. It is people getting out of college now, middle class, upper middle class kids getting their degree, going out into the workforce and realizing they can't afford to buy anything. It's not just interest rates, it's the cost of housing itself. And those two problems have the exact same cause, which is we're simply not keeping up with the demand. I don't know what the exact figure is, Will, you may know it, that we are short 25, 26 million units nationwide. And again, it's not that there's some, snidely whiplash twirling his mustache standing somewhere saying, I'm not going to allow anybody to build houses. Everybody wants to build houses, but we all run into these obstacles. And sometimes the obstacle are people that look exactly like us. It's people who share our views, but they just don't want to give their part. They don't want to sacrifice something that's going to inconvenience them. And so, again, it would be easier if there were a single cause, a flip we just needed to switch. But we've identified that we don't have enough housing. Certainly Obama made the point. Every president since, I don't know how many presidents before have made the point. This is a national issue. But because so many of us are obstacles in our own way, it's really difficult to solve.
Where do some of the big, huge investment firms, the BlackRocks and the companies out there, fall in with these property issues?
A lot of large, investment firms are being blamed for driving up prices. And what the story we're hearing is like, they own hundreds of thousands of homes. They're outbidding young people. They're outbidding anyone. And
paying cash, the whole thing.
Right.
That's what I hear too.
And they're driving up prices. And again, that is a compelling argument. It gives you that kind of snidely whiplash, if that reference isn't too old, that you can point to and say, evil corporate overlord. But the fact is, they've been bidding on properties for years. The reason why they're bidding on properties is because it's a commodity, because there's so few, it's a profit opportunity for them, right? You've got constrained supply, so it's a great investment opportunity. But part of the reason is they may have been bidding on homes for years. They weren't winning in the past. They weren't winning in the past because people had mortgages available to them and they had more interest. If you're a corporate buyer, you don't care about this house per se or that house per se. You just want houses.
It's a balance sheet item.
Exactly. But if you fall in love with a house and your spouse falls in love with the house, you're going to do what you can to get it. After the housing crash, we kind of tightened up how people get mortgages, and so that's been a problem. Right, and so that's been a real problem. And so again, it's convenient to blame these corporate investors, but in fact, they own 2% or less of the market nationwide. They're not affecting prices. So again, if you're looking for a bad guy, that's a convenient bad guy. But really, if we had the housing that we needed, prices would come down. It would be less attractive an investment in the first place for these big companies. So yes, it is a story we see out there, but it is by no means the cause where we are right now.
Yeah, I think in any policy debate, any adverse outcome that we experience through the adoption of a policy or the lack of an adoption of policy is the identification of the cause. Like,
Right.
okay, this is the boogeyman, so we got to find the boogeyman. We deal with the boogeyman, problem solved. And when it comes to housing, there have been so many boogeymen through so many decades that each of us in our own way as consumers, as housing providers,
Right.
as voters in local communities have served in that boogeyman role, because we all have conditions that we place on the deployment of capital. This is what is acceptable to me in my community, and therefore anything above and beyond that is greed. Anything below that is falling short of the high standard that I have for my community. And so if every person has a proprietary set of their own standards and they deploy those in a political way, you basically get that political version of lockjaw with what do I do to move forward to undo all of this. So I think part of this housing discourse must be a reflection individually first, and then as a society about what can I do to remove some of the conditions that I've placed on housing, because we're all housing consumers, right? We all sleep somewhere. That doesn't necessarily make us an expert in housing economics. So how do we find the actual information out there to make data-driven solutions? Remove to the best of our ability the emotional aspect of it, because as we're human beings and housing is emotional, so there's always going to be an emotive element to it. But we really can't have a conversation about how to move forward until we do that self-assessment and realize individually, including, Will Reuter, the executive vice president of the HBA, that I've placed my own conditions on housing.
Are we all going to refer to ourselves in the third person?
Correct.
Yeah. So what
just wanted to
Patrick
remind
Tuohey
you.
No, we're
was
going to
saying
refer to ourselves as the boogeyman.
This episode brought to you by.
So that's exactly right. I think what has happened over the years is we have maybe unintentionally developed a sense of entitlement. I'm not only entitled to my piece of property, but I should have a say in what's going on in my community. And that started, I'm thinking of Raleigh, North Carolina, which adopted a community advisory commission in the 70s. And again, it was well intended because they had a mayor. It was the first black mayor. He wanted to invest everybody in development in the community. And so what he did was he set up these community advisory commissions that were meant to represent the public at large. We're going to build a development. Let's hear what the public thinks. Unfortunately, what happened over time is that those community advisory commissions became captured by incumbent homeowners, people who were already in the neighborhood. Oftentimes, and we see this from research out of San Francisco, I forget the author, but he looked at kind of 4,000 statements made at planning meetings and to the best of his ability looked at who the person was giving the statement. And what we find in North Carolina, Raleigh specifically, and San Francisco, what we find is that the people who show up to object are whiter than the population, are wealthier than the population, and are older than the population at large. So these are incumbent homeowners who bought a house in 1960 something and thinks that they have a right to the community around them, that they should be able to freeze it in amber, in effect, because they don't want their community to change. And I get that from their point of view, but they are imposing their own view of a community around all the people, around the property rights of all the people around them. So again, what we set up in North Carolina, and again around the country, is a opportunity for incumbent homeowners to cast a veto on the development that happens around them. And even if they don't classically have an official veto, those people have an awful lot of soft power with the planning commission, with the city council, and so that gets in the way. So that's kind of one thing that clogs it up. In Kansas City, we hear an awful lot about non-resident landowners and people who are keeping homes that are in disrepair. But the largest owner of vacant properties in Kansas City is the city of Kansas City through the land bank. And so again, they want to point somebody else, but in so many of the issues in Kansas City, whether it's me as a homeowner stopping my neighbor from doing what they want to do, the problem is me. When the city wants to cast blame somewhere else, no, the problem is you. And it's not just the vetocracy, it's the regulations. I'm preaching to the choir. You guys all do this for a living. But it's the sludge in the pipe that we've set up unintentionally and slowly and bit by bit over the years and untangling it. If I could go back to whatever year that the Supreme Court passed Euclid decision, which legalized zoning, right? I would go back and just get rid of that altogether. People have a complete misunderstanding of what zoning means, but it is just one way that we tell private property owners that they can't do what they want with their property. Obviously it's not my last point, but one of the things I want to point people to is our great cities in the United States, including Kansas City, grew and developed before we had all these regulations, and it developed naturally and logically. So you set up on a river and you have a trading post, and somebody buys a small piece of land or builds a small trading post. And then if your town is successful, people want to live near the trading post. So you build a hotel there, or maybe you build a house. And then after a while, there's more commerce, like we'll tear down this house and build a storefront or put an apartment above the saloon. And what's happening is because people want that land and supply of land two-dimensionally is constrained, you build up. And that's what's always happened. And the thing that a lot of homeowners can't understand or don't want to understand is you can decrease the cost of housing per unit while maintaining the value of the land by building up. You put more units on a parcel of land than you would before. It's how cities built. It's how we ended up with skyscrapers. Why do you think the center part of the city always has the tallest building? Because that's where it started. That's where the value is. But we've perverted that, and we have Chuck Barone, who's the head of the Strong Towns movement, who advocates for all sorts of urban and suburban reforms, talks about how we build these communities, these developments, and you're allowed to do nothing with your land. You can't build a duplex on it. You can't tear it down and put up a storefront. You can't have a corner grocery store. And so communities that looked beautiful when they opened, from that point on are just deteriorating. Because you can't adapt your community to what the people want. I live in Waldo. I absolutely love Waldo. I can walk to any number of things. The houses on my block, it's a leafy community. It's all residential, but in a 10-minute walk, I'm right at Warnell. I've got bars, restaurants, I've got a grocery store, eye doctors, all sorts of things. And it's not because some central planner came in and said, this is what you need. It's because over time,
it happened naturally
Waldo,
and appropriately.
Exactly. The people who owned all that land looked around and said, what would be of most value here? A grocery store or an eye doctor. And that's what we want to get back to, having our communities respond to our needs. But again, you've got all these homeowners who say, I don't want the world around me to change.
So that's what I was going to talk about. So it's almost like the president of the homeowners association that was given a bunch of power, right? Those people are looking around and they're poo-pooing anything that feels like it could invade on their little slice of heaven. And the topic, I believe, today is, what is it? It's NIMBYism.
Right.
Where did that phrase come from?
So it is generally so it stands in Not in My Backyard. It is generally a pejorative term put onto people who oppose housing. And I think what's important about the term is the people who are accused of being NIMBYs. I don't know that anybody says I'm a proud NIMBY, but the people who are accused of being NIMBYs aren't anti-housing. They'll always say, no, I think we should have more housing, just not here, not next to my house. We're seeing this at least two places in Kansas City, in the West Side neighborhood and then up in Parkville. And the Parkville story, the Star did a great piece on it. It's hilarious. So all these people say, no, I'm for housing. I just don't want it near me.
Right.
And we know from research out of the Mercatus Center in Virginia that has a great urbanity project, and Emily Hamilton has written about how the best opportunities to provide housing are not over there in the bad part of town. It's allowing people of different means to come into the wealthier parts of town, because that's where the amenities are. But we guard that. We don't want the other to come in, and you can define other however you want. We don't want the other to come in, and the history of housing, and I was slow to come to this as kind of a suburban white guy. I was slow to come to this because I didn't want to believe it. But the history of zoning, the history of housing policy in the United States is very ugly. They literally did not want blacks and immigrants moving into their neighborhoods, and this starts in the 1910s. You've got a lot of Southern blacks coming up into the north, And so the North was like, oh no, we don't want these people moving into our neighborhoods. And it wasn't just whites. There were blacks in Chicago who were all for zoning to keep these southern poorer blacks out. Berkeley was the first city to adopt single-family zoning. And their explicit reason was, we want to keep the housing values high, because although the Supreme Court told us in 1916 we can't zone explicitly by race, we can accomplish the same goals through other means, which is we'll price them out. We'll price out immigrants and we'll price out blacks. Nolan Gray, in his book Arbitrary Lines, said that zoning as a tool of segregation may be the most successful federal policy ever, because we are still living with it. People talk about redlining and blockbusting and stuff like that, and certainly Kansas City has its history, but zoning is the biggest and ugliest and most intentional policy for segregating people.
Well, as an Italian, I'm third generation born in America. My family came through Ellis Island. Guess where they put them? Right in East Boston. The Italians went in East Boston. The Irish guys went in South Boston.
Southie.
And Southie, right? And people pushed, so that started, like you say, almost right off the boat, if you will.
Right. Well, look, I have no problem with keeping the Italians off to the side. I'll make an exception for the eye ties. But yes, it was. But what happened in the United States? What happened in the United States, of course, is that European immigrants were able to blend in and look like the rest of the country. But absolutely, it was a tool. Zoning was a tool to keep the other out of their neighborhoods. And again, like I said, I came to that slowly, but I think it's irrefutable. And so now what we've got to do, and so the NIMBYs, to get back to your question, the NIMBYs would never say, well, I want to keep the other out of here. What they'll say is, no, I want to preserve the community.
The character.
I know, I hear that. I grew up in the South. I hear the community character, and I'm like, I've heard this term before.
Is that before or after they say, bless her heart, right? Yeah.
And so again, we're in this issue where, like you said before, where all of us have unclean hands. All of us play a small part in being an obstacle, even if we don't, especially if we don't understand it. What I would like to see is if we just relax that. Let's get out of the way. I mean, look, you guys represent people. What I try to tell politicians is there are hundreds of people in your city who literally make a living off of fixing the problem you face. They want to fix this problem. It's what they do. Let them. All you have to do is let them. You don't have to come up with some complicated policy like so many other issues to solve this problem. Just get out of the way of the men and women who want to build homes, all types of homes.
Right.
And so, look, what I love about the housing issue is, as I said before, it's brought people from left and right together. We have YIMBYs, yes, in my backyard, at progressive left-of-center activists in Seattle and Minneapolis and San Francisco who are beating the drum for deregulation, specifically of housing, because they see that in their communities, housing prices are chasing people away, or like we said before, it's keeping people from buying houses. So I want to say it's an issue whose time has come. It's not going to happen right away, but
Yes.
I think so many cities being pushed by the right and the left to deregulate and faced with the just huge problems of housing are coming around slowly. St. Louis, just in the past 2 weeks, worked to reduce the lot size needed to build single and two double unit housing. That's great. St. Louis has, at the same time, did a lot of dumb things.
Right.
But again, we're coming around. So I think what people need to understand, maybe the line from Pogo, we've met the enemy and he is us. We need to see, all right, I can play a role. I've got to give up some of my entitlement. I've got to understand that my neighbors have just as much property rights as I do. And ultimately, I think maybe this is just a reflection on my own personal views. When you walk around Midtown Kansas City, and I always think of Bell and 43rd Street. So you're right there by, the restaurants have all changed, but like Jazz is there, and Mongolian Grill was there, and not Bazookas, Bronx Deli used to be there. We'll cut that out. But that was a great place. It was a great walkable neighborhood. You had, the hookah place on the corner. You have coffee shops there and small bars. And then you walk down the streets and you have single family and multi-unit housing right there. It's a great place to walk around. I think a lot of people love that type of neighborhood. And look, God love them. The people that want to live in Olathe or wherever and come and go out of their garage door and never meet their neighbors and live on a huge lot, you can have that. But the government, we shouldn't start at single-family zoning housing, right? People who want to build that, the ranch-style house on a big piece of land, they can always have that. But the government shouldn't say everybody must live that way. And right now, I think 75-80% of the United States is zoned single-family housing.
Yeah.
So anyway, sorry, that's a very long answer to a short question.
I'm sorry, did I cut you off?
No, go ahead.
You know, I find that it's very hypocritical. So you've got that NIMBY, right? That person that says, I don't want it in my backyard, but you know what? And I saw this in Shawnee. I live in Western Shawnee, trying to get a new apartment complex up. And I understand that's going to drive more traffic and lots of things, but the same people that are complaining about it are the same people that are saying, how come we don't have more restaurants? How come we don't have more of this? Well, if you don't have the people to support those businesses, you can't run the business.
Right.
You can't have it both ways.
No, you're exactly right. And this isn't specific to housing, but I'll bet those same people are real pains for a restaurant to open and get licensing and deal with parking mandates
Right.
and deal with health codes and all that type of stuff, because we live increasingly in a safety society where any risk we want to remove. And so that just raises the burdens of people who want to open those restaurants.
Sure.
And of course, to the degree that zoning gets in the way, it just drives up the price of land. So we are, by trying to put ourselves and our communities in bubbles, we are chasing away the very the very free market come and go that helps communities thrive and grow over time. Communities that lock down development rules, that lock down zoning, aren't preserving themselves. They immediately start decaying. Mm-hmm. But a community that allows people to change over time is a community that is still alive and will grow to adapt.
Put.
Yeah, and you cannot find yourself in a situation where you're able to predict exactly what your community's needs are going to be in 20, 30, 40
Right.
years. I mean, yes, communities do have and should continue to have some comprehensive plans, so that they've got at least a roadmap, but they've got to be adaptable. And they can't be so prescriptive that the lifestyle that we've got today, we've got to go through great pains to put in black and white legal language to preserve exactly what it's going to be in 30, 40 years. It's just not the way that communities grow. It's not the way societies operate. Needs change, tastes change, and we have to be able to respond to those things. So, zoning is a great example of one of those things that has had a long tail effect on
Right.
the way things have grown. But it's been compounded by a lot of other, again, perhaps better intentioned things than zoning, but you've got your fire codes, your building codes, your energy efficiency codes, the Americans with Disabilities Act, all of these things that are rooted in an inherent good. Like, this is for a segment of the population. We can't have percentages of our population dying in fires. We've got to make sure that buildings are constructed and the fire department has a chance to get people out before the structure collapses on them. Or, methods, materials change when it comes to energy codes. We can incorporate those and get a tighter level of efficiency. We'll use less energy and therefore decrease costs for consumers. And we got to make sure things are accessible for all manners of mobility across, the human spectrum. And again, all of those things are inherently good, but they all compound to make the building and development much more difficult to do.
I was going to tease you about being against Americans with disabilities,
Exactly.
but apparently you're anti-fire, so that's good.
Right. So, yeah.
Well, you're right. Look, any regulation, any constriction, any complexity we put on somebody's ability to do a thing raises prices. Blanket. Now, we will say, for the sake of safety, for the sake of allowing people access, we're willing to take on some of those costs. So safety regulations, those are fine. When I say I want to deregulate, it doesn't mean I don't want to have
don't want the Wild
standards
West.
for
Deregulate doesn't mean eliminate, and I
Right.
think that's what
Right.
people forget. Yeah.
And so we can. There's a bright line there somewhere between what we're doing to protect ourselves and protect the others that build for us, and then there's rules that just drive up cost. Square footage and frontage rules and all that type of stuff. And again, in some wealthy communities in the Kansas City area, I've been told by developers, they intentionally over-regulate because they want to drive up the cost, because they want to keep out the other. And they want to keep out the other because they've got a very wealthy school district that they want to protect. And so again, some of this is intentional. And, you know, the wealthy will always have all the opportunities to do what they want.
Right.
But the regulation is driving up cost, and it's pricing out the rest of us. And so again, I think we can draw a bright line around safety, around the regulations we are willing to have. But we need to understand, and I tease some of my friends on the left, we need to understand that everything we do is going to drive up cost. Again, there's a standard there we're willing to accept. But when you say, you know, we're going to increase the cost of landlords, and you're not going to be able to pass this on to your tenants, I mean, that is just laughable. That is laugh out loud. But they think there's a free lunch. They think they can reach in, and again, I'll betray my political views here. These people who have no background in housing, who have no expertise in construction or zoning or city planning or any of this stuff, think merely because they were elected to office, now they should have the final say in what is built. They don't respect the talents and the skills of the people around them, and they are reaching in. Their intentions are pure, but their consequences.
It's a lack of big picture thinking.
That's right. But even then, what they think they want to do is, look, here's what they'll say. Look, we don't have enough affordable housing. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell developers, well, you've got to have inclusionary zoning, right? So some of the units you build, or inclusionary housing, some of the units you build are going to have to be below market rate or something like that. And they think, well, really the problem is just developers just want to make a whole bunch of money, and we need to tell them you can't. But of course that makes two problems out of one, because you still have all the regulations that drive up costs. You're just picking some of the developers who are large enough to have government relations departments and build big developments. The rehabber is screwed, right? But you're driving up the cost, and then you're going to these big developers and saying, you need to reduce the cost on some of these units, which of course they have to put the cost on the rest of the units. What the city needs to do, what any city needs to do, is just say, no, we're going to get rid of this. We're going to encourage all of you to build. And there is research, and I was shocked at first to find this years ago, because I was spending my time complaining about luxury developments that were being subsidized in downtown Kansas City, that even an increase in luxury housing makes other housing more affordable. Right. Because when you flood the market, even with McMansions, when you flood the market,
people move up,
and the apartment building that you lived in last year, because it has more competition, is going to come down in price because it's got more competition out there. So again, it's this idea that I know what we need to do. We need to develop these kind of Rube Goldberg complicated policies, when really what they need to do is just get out of the way, let those developers build. If in 5 years they run into problems, they don't have enough parking because they've reduced parking mandates, or they've got too much traffic, that's a problem any city wants to have. Right. We've got too many people, we've got too much traffic. But right now, too many of our urban cores are dying because we've driven up the cost and nobody can afford to build. And it's heartbreaking. It's not any one thing. It's thousands of tiny things. And all your listeners can name 10 of them. No matter what industry they're in, they know the 10 that are slowing them down.
Yep. And when people flee the urban core, then there are fewer restaurants that can be sustained, and it reduces the reasons to even go down there if you're not living there in the first place. So it exacerbates urban sprawl.
Kansas City, Kansas, to its credit, relaxed its parking mandates in the old part of its downtown, and because they realized that, look, we can't get that new immigrant restaurant because they don't just have to pay for the produce and rehab the place. They've got to worry about providing 2.5 parking spaces for every 1,000 square feet. So now they have to have a vacant lot next to them. Well, the impact of that vacant lot is, as someone described, I think it was a neighborhood in Kansas City. I want to say it was the Ivanhoe neighborhood, but I can't remember. But they described it as a smile with missing teeth. You've got so many vacant lots that the neighborhood it looks cockeyed. And so you've got these parts of downtown in KCK and in Kansas City where, because of parking mandates, we just have all this empty space, when what we would have done 100 years ago is that land would be super valuable and we would build up.
Yeah. One of the oldest tropes out there is that development doesn't pay for itself. It's a net cost to a community. And a way to look at that, my response to those is typically, well, if your community had stopped growing right before it produced the unit of housing that you currently occupy, what's your time frame that you're judging about whether or not development pays for itself? Does it pay, within a week or a month of your own proprietary definition of when this needs to quote unquote benefit me? No, communities grow over time. They've got to. Prosperous communities build things, and they build a lot of things, and they build a lot of different things. But the question that I think is more difficult to answer, or at least more inconvenient to answer for those people, is have you determined what the costs of stagnation or degrowth are? And that is far more detrimental to the long-term economic prospects of yourself and your community than anything new being built in your community would be.
Kansas City is a great example. In the 50s and 60s, we expanded our footprint. We went from maybe 50 square miles to something like 300. We extend up to the airport. 2 years ago in the city budget, the mayor said, we have got too much land. We don't generate enough revenue to provide services for this population, right? And it's not just social services, it's the roads. I mean, we've grown too quickly and our population didn't follow. So you're exactly right. Cities are getting in their own way. But Mark Moses wrote a book on municipal finance, and he was a finance guy from a couple of cities in California. And he made a great point to me. We were at a conference together that hadn't really occurred to me, but he's exactly right. Cities always want to grow. And so the government's always trying to figure out how can we grow, how can we attract new development. Actually, a well-run city doesn't care if it grows, because if it's and he calls it kind of a Ponzi scheme. But a well-run city just says, what do we have now? Can we pay for what we have now? Now look, if we grow, that's wonderful. And if we shrink, we're okay. But a lot of times what cities do is they overextend themselves, right? So what they'll do is they are not generating enough revenue, so they try to get 100 new houses. Well, how can they get 100 new houses? Well, they'll offer some sort of financing, some sort of public money to get the developer to build that. The developer builds roads, but those roads start decaying immediately. Maybe they've got 30 years, maybe they've got 50 years. By the time that bill comes due, the city still doesn't have enough money, so it's got to incentivize somebody else to develop. It's constantly chasing the next revenue because they're not kind of,
they're not profitable in any particular spot.
No, that's right. And I'm thinking of like a Jenga game where you've got to be stable. You've got to be stable where you are right now. If another house is not built, you've got to be able to pay your bills. And what happens is cities have gotten themselves into this point where they constantly need to feed their current revenue needs by allowing building, by subsidizing it, because they're saying, well, we'll get that. When those properties come off the rolls, we'll get all that property tax, or we'll get all that income, and it's a mess. We've made a mess of it.
So you started this podcast with people are, the cities are looking and they're seeing that other people are having the same problem that they're having, and they're just kind of stopping and watching. Is there anyone doing a really good job? Is there anyone that could be the model?
So there's no one city that's doing everything well. The first city that comes to mind is Houston. Because Houston never adopted zoning the way we have it now. And when it's come on the ballot to adopt zoning, it has been defeated. And it's been defeated largely by minority populations who understand in Houston that zoning is aimed at them, at restricting their movement. Now, again, it's not the Wild West in Houston when it comes to development, because what they've allowed is particular communities, homeowners associations, to kind of adopt their own maybe rules on what you can build. But again, at least the people coming and going from those neighborhoods have buy-in. If you don't want to be restricted, you don't live there. But if you've got a piece of land, you can do with it what you want, and it allows communities to build and change over time like we were talking about. And as a result, despite Houston's great growth, it hasn't seen an increase in housing prices that the rest of the country has had. The Wall Street Journal just did a great story 2 or 3 days ago on New Rochelle, about 30 miles outside of New York City. The Better Cities Project, where I'm policy director, did a case study on New Rochelle 4 years ago that we released, where we talked to the mayor at the time and some of his policy advisors, and they did a brilliant idea. They wanted to grow. They hadn't had any growth. They hadn't had any investment in like 10 years. They knew city government was the problem. So they approached, they were willing to kind of think anew, and they approached a developer, and he said, look, here's what we'll do. I will do the environmental impact analysis for your whole downtown. I will eat that. I'll pay for it myself. But I want right of first refusal when lots come on to develop. And so they said, okay. So they did that. Then they had all these meetings with the community before anything was built. And they said, all right, what is it that you value? Maybe we want a daycare center here. Maybe we want a black box theater. We want restaurants. And so the city came up with really a menu. And it went to developers and it said, you know, in the center part of the town, here are the height restrictions for your construction. And then in the next ring around it, they're a little bit less. And the next ring around it's a little bit less. And you would look at this menu and say, all right, I'm cleared. I'm making this up now. I'm cleared for 10 stories of housing. But if I add a black box theater and 2 units for restaurants, I can add 2 more stories to my construction. And the brilliant part of it, which they didn't think about at the time, but which the developer told me after the fact, the brilliant point is because the public gave buy-in in the beginning, they could not come back after the fact and say, I don't like the color of the exterior of your building, or I don't think. And so developers, and this is one of the things I learned about developers, I think, Will, we've talked about it before. Developers are okay with no, and they're happy with a yes. What they don't want is a maybe. And too much development in this country, they're told maybe. Buy the land, then we'll see. Well, of course, you're incurring overhead costs and stuff like that, and so your costs are going up even though the land isn't yet profitable. But what New Rochelle did, to its credit, is it got out of the way, it worked with developers, and they have seen an explosion in housing units, and rental prices have gone down.
Unheard of.
Because they are providing what people need, and the city, through this deal, the city got out of the way. And so again, sometimes maybe city councils need to be saved from themselves. You think about, well, Will, you would know about this, having worked on the Hill for a while, you know, it was the base closing commission in the 80s or something like that. And the problem was we had too many military bases around the country, but you couldn't close any one of them because the congressman from that district would say, well, I don't want you to close this one, so I'll vote to keep yours in North Carolina open if you keep mine in Kansas open. And so they had the commission, the base closing commission. It was an up or down vote for everything. And so people, because they were voting to screw everybody in the country, were willing to do that even though they suffered a little bit. What cities need to do is come up with something, work with developers, and spare yourself the stress on the back end from having to nitpick and micromanage.
Yep.
Again, the men and women who develop want to build. They want to solve your problem. It's what they do. Cities just need to let them. And the example out of Houston, the example out of New Rochelle is that it is possible to work together to find a path forward.
Yep. Get to a decision point sooner in the process. You know, for the most part, the people that we represent in the Home Builders Association, the only thing they ask for is for permission. And they just want a clear-cut path to get that permission. And if you can say, if a community can say, here are the 10 things that we require, and once you do those 10, it's all yours. Mm-hmm. It's the issue becomes when you get through those 10, they're like, okay, here's your next quest. Here's the 25 we're going to need to satisfy, and it goes on and on and on to the point where, do you really want this to occur? Absolutely, we want this to occur, provided that you do the rest of what we've asked for.
And that story
you only
about
found out about it today.
That story about New Rochelle exemplifies that, because the new mayor is saying, well, if we were to do it over again, maybe we do this and that. Like, oh, what you're doing is you're introducing cost. You are demonstrating why this would have never happened under your mayoralty because you want to nitpick. And look, the last point I make, or a final point I would make, is we elect the men and women to our city councils and our state legislators, and we tell them do something. And that's really dangerous, because sometimes the do something is a bad idea, but it's something.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we as voters need to say, I want to respect the property rights of my neighbor. I want to allow them to develop, to have it suit their family, help it suit the community. And I don't want to run to City Hall every time something bad happens. And so we need to vote for people who say, you know what, I don't know what the solution is, but I'm not a home builder. My job is to keep the roads paved and your taxes low, and that's it. And if a new development over there will help me do that, I'm all in it. But we elect these city councils and we expect them immediately to be everything.
Yeah, it's like we wondered what would happen when housing is such a locally governed product that we asked these part-time legislatures to be experts in 1,000 different things. It's frankly, we've set them up for failure as a society.
We've set them up for failure, and we've set up a situation where their incentive is to say no, because it's safer. If you're a civil servant, you're an elected official, saying yes, and people could come back and complain to me tomorrow. But if I say no, I spare myself that. And so again, the incentive for them all the time, because politicians are risk averse, it's just the nature of the beast, we incentivize them to say no. So my dream is we get all my neighbors and the people all over Kansas City to say, you know what, I'm going to mind my own business. And as long as the structures I'm living in and are being built around me are safe, I want to encourage people to do what they will with their land. The fear they have is, well, what if somebody's going to put a pig rendering plant to my, next to my house? Look, the bank will stop that person from buying 1/8 of an acre to put up a slaughterhouse.
Right.
The free market is not just bedlam. There are also restrictions. A bank isn't going to loan you money, and if you're going to spend your own money to buy the house next to me, tear it down, and put a pig rendering plant, you're an idiot.
Right.
And you're going to go out of business immediately because the roads aren't, the roads aren't built to handle your hogs.
Right.
So, but we have this kind of risk aversion. We put it on City Hall, and we end up with the problem we have. And my hope is that the new generation that's coming up is voting on this, and they just want to get all the rules out of the way because technology has allowed them to trust themselves rather than have to appeal to City Hall.
Yeah. Well, I think we see what the consequences of no are, and those well-lit paths to yes is really the only way we're going to get out from underneath this. One story from my time on the Hill, somebody asked then ranking member Richard Shelby, former United States Senator from Alabama, Senator, why did you vote against that amendment on this appropriations bill we were working on? And he said, well, I'll tell you, a no never got me in trouble.
Yeah.
And so there was a political incentive for him to vote no on that particular thing. So as a society, if we can reverse that, where the political incentive, the renewal of faith in your service, your re-election, is because you said yes to housing and it had a net benefit, we need to make the carrot in front of the politician's nose be a yes rather than the current no. And that's how we can get there.
No, and I think to get back to where we started off the conversation, I think a number of cities like New Rochelle, like Houston, that are getting out of the way are seeing enough positive return that other cities that would otherwise fear getting involved are saying, oh, these guys are seeing returns, maybe we can see returns too.
Be a great ending
I'm telling you,
to a good problem.
This has been a fascinating conversation. We'll be back for the third hour of this podcast. No, I'm just joking.
It is great.
But been a great conversation with Patrick Tuohey. Before we let you go, Patrick, one question that I always have for interesting people that deal in what I would consider historically niche topics, which is housing politics. How do you get into a field like this? Did Patty Tuohey running around one day decide I'm going to be a housing expert? How does one evolve to the kind of the area of expertise you've come to?
Don't ever call me Patty.
Okay.
No, in fact, I joke that if high school Patrick Tuohey knew what he was doing for his career, he'd be horrified. I don't think anybody necessarily says I want to get involved in housing policy. Right. I think what happens, I consider myself a policy entrepreneur. You look around and you see, where can I add value? I never intended to spend this much time talking about housing or crime, but they're important to me. I live in a house and I don't like crime. Right. So they touch my life. But no, very rarely, I think, do people have the foresight to pursue something in school. And I got a degree in political science, so I majored in undecided. So this came because there was a need in Kansas City, and I love it. And one of the reasons why I like municipal policy specifically is it's the least ideological. I tend to collect friends on the left. Friends in my neighborhood are big, pro-government and all that type of stuff, but I can walk across the street and they will complain just as bitterly about potholes and slow trash removal. And municipal policy is all about solving problems, solving immediate problems. And I think we learned that during the pandemic. So I enjoy it, but no, I never sought out to be a housing guy.
Nope. but you've turned your passion into a certain amount of expertise, and I think that's the key thing we need to get to in the overall housing debate, as well as is being able to differentiate between passion and expertise. Seek out the experts and allow that to be incorporated in whatever policy proposals move forward. But if you've enjoyed today's episode, you the listener, we also want to talk about the things that you want to talk about. So please do visit kchba.org/podcast and drop us a question or a suggestion about what you want to hear a future episode of this HBA After Hours podcast to address. As always, I'm your host, Will Reuter.
I'm Keith Sauro, and we have a huge thank you to Star Companies and Sun Lumber for today.
Until next time, thank you.
Next time. Thanks.
Thanks, Patrick.